How's it going, everyone? It is I, Anime Outlet, and this is What If Deku Was a Ghoul, the movie. I hope you all do enjoy it, and if you all do, please smash that like button, comment, and subscribe. It really does help this channel out, as I upload every single day on this channel. I hope you all do enjoy it, and yeah, sit back, relax, and enjoy. And now, let's begin the video. Mr. and Mrs. Midoriya, I'm proud to announce your child Izuku does have a quirk, the doctor would proudly say with a smile on his face. Both Mrs. and Mrs. Midoriya, both Inko and Hisashi, would both smile down towards Izuku. With both of them smiling, Izuku would smile back at them, both of them hugging him tightly. Thank you, doctor. Thank you, Inko would respond, where they would then pick up Izuku, taking him to the car, putting him in his car seat, where they would then drive home. Getting an email next morning saying that Izuku's quirk should activate any day now, and that it's only a matter of time. Many of this or just they would all be proud of this, with Izuku hopefully being able to carry down the bloodline of just the Hisashi Midoriya name, as Hisashi Midoriya was a very famous hero, top 25 in fact, and he was one of the best heroes for merchandising besides All Might, as he always loved signing little kids' just action figures or shirts. He would always do that. He was a crowd pleaser. He loved making everybody happy. And so he really hoped that Izuku had a flashy and elegant quirk like his, being able to breathe fire, or even a cooler one like being able to use strong telekinesis to pick up boulders and slam them into villains. However, Izuku's quirk would not be any of these. It was simply just a regular, ordinary quirk, one that allowed for his eyes to turn a just dark black with red veins bulging out of them a little bit. As the discovery of this, it would sadden his father. However, it really wouldn't do much, as Izuku was still a normal, happy little boy that was just as loving as ever, and as long as he was happy, he was happy. However, something bad would end up happening just after Izuku woke in his quirk. That morning for breakfast, after awakening his quirk, him being happy, smiling just as can be, having such a cool quirk, he would rush downstairs, begging his mom to make him his favorite breakfast. She would of course agree, making him up his favorite breakfast, sitting it down in front of him. However, as soon as it was there, something seemed off. The smell, the taste. It was deceitful, it was disgusting. Something about it just eroded Izuku's tongue. Izuku immediately spat it out onto his plate as his mother would look at him with a questioning look. Izuku, is something wrong? No, Izuku would say, pleading with his mother, not wanting her to know that her food, something he had always loved, wasn't as good as it wasn't as good as it used to be. Izuku would stare down at it, his fork wobbling in his hand before it would slip out of his grasp. He would end up holding onto his tongue, taking another bite just as quickly as he did to the first. Again, disgusting. It was horrible. It tasted like he was eating rotten meat. Izuku would spit it out again as his mother would look at him worriedly. Is it not good? Did I overcook something? She would say, wondering towards Izuku. Hisashi would look at him for a second, reading a newspaper, or telling Izuku to eat up. He has school in a couple minutes. He doesn't want to be late for the bus. Besides, I'm sure he's just playing. You know how these young kids are. Hisashi would wave it off. This would give Izuku a false sense of hope, chowing down, barely managing to gulp it down his throat before just walking off to the bus stop where it would be picked up, where he would end up finding himself in the bathroom throwing up his breakfast and now having even more of an empty stomach. By lunchtime, Izuku's stomach was growling even further, and because of this, he was just so hungry, and being so young, he couldn't control his quirk. And what happened next wasn't Izuku at all. It was the monster that lingered within him. A monster that was controlling him, gripping onto his stomach, just pleading with it to find something to eat, something that looked appetizing. And so, Izuku would find it. This happened to be one of his classmates, a young Bakugo Katsuki. This Bakugo and Izuku were both playing tag out on the playground, where the arrogant Bakugo would end up pushing Izuku down after tagging him. "I told you I'd catch up to you," would say, flexing his puny little muscles. Izuku getting mad and his hunger now exploding, he would erupt into anger, his Kagane releasing out these 4 tentacle-like things, where a tentacle would then inject itself right through Bakugo's stomach. Bakugo hanging there, being onto his tentacle, just yelling out, crying in pain as the tears would stream down, hitting the mulch of the playground. Izuku, completely shocked, his eyes widening, his Kagane would then disappear into blood, falling to the floor. He would end up backing up, hitting the metal pole of the playground, as kids on the slide would stare at him, just in complete horror. Bakugo standing there, his arms shaking around his stomach, seeing a massive gaping hole right through it. A teacher, seeing this, would rush over, yelling at Izuku, calling him a villain, so the rest of the students, seeing Izuku's villainous quirk, would do so as well. What was wrong with Izuku? What happened to him? He was never like this. He was never one to lash out like Bakugo. What could have caused this? She would immediately call the police, an ambulance, and, of course, Izuku's parents. All of them arriving in an ambulance, taking Bakugo off to the hospital, where his parents were promptly waiting. However, when the police would arrive, they would question the young boy, as Izuku would say that he was just so angry by Bakugo pushing him down that something just changed in him. He didn't like it, Izuku would say, starting to tear up. The police officers would nod their head before looking over towards their parents. "Look, we'll let you off with a warning here, but control your kid and his quirk. If you need to get medicine for this, please tell the quirk doctors. We really don't want to have to deal with another incident like that. You're lucky that little boy didn't die, or else both of you would be probably facing jail time. Please, just please, do some action. And you, Sashi, you don't want your record to end up going down the drain like this. I know you're a hero and all. You should know how to take care of this," he would say, patting Hisashi on the back as the police chief would walk away. Hisashi would look mortified at his own son, his own flesh and blood. It just wasn't him anymore. Something changed in Hisashi, much like it had changed to Izuku. The same would be said with Inko, but not as much. She was just as horrified, but didn't have the same anger, the same rashness that Hisashi did. And so when Hisashi knew what had to be done, bringing little Izuku off to some random part of the woods, he would end up opening up the van door of the family car. Opening it up, he would unbuckle Izuku's seatbelt, not saying a word, as Izuku would stare towards them. "Mommy? Daddy?" Izuku would say with an innocent look. However, both of them would only stare towards him with just anger and sort of a gaze of disappointment. Izuku, reading their emotions, reading their face, would know this wasn't like them at all. He didn't know what was wrong with his own parents. Sashi would shut the door before getting back into the car, driving off, leaving Izuku there. Izuku would watch them disappear into the distance. Inko would try to plead with Hisashi, but he knew it was to be done. And later that night, Hisashi would report to the police that his son had been kidnapped by an armed assailant, someone who had broke into their house and had taken Izuku, disappearing into the night. All that remained was a just broken lock on their front door. Izuku sat in the middle of an empty forest, staring up at the moon, crying his eyes out, just bawling over and over again, as he didn't know what to do. His own parents had abandoned him. And one of them was a top 25 hero. The flamethrower Dragonair. He couldn't believe it. Why? Why was this happening to him? He just didn't understand at all. Hours would pass as Izuku's tears would slowly dry up, his stomach growling once again. He would end up wandering off into just a light he saw in the distance, a small village located miles out from the closest city. Izuku, seeing this, would walk up to it, wandering the streets at night, many streetlights still on. Many of the villagers that lived there were still just awake, dining with their families or going to a local restaurant. Izuku would end up stumbling into a bar where a couple of people would end up noticing him, and a couple of kind strangers seeing Izuku there, they would end up just grabbing him and bringing him outside, asking him what was wrong. Promptly, though, Izuku, who, with mud strewn all over his face, his hair wild, wasn't recognizable as Hisashi's son, someone who was missing all over the news. Because of this, these two people fell victim to Izuku. His quirk activated his Kagane out, the two being completely stabbed, much like Bakugo, by Izuku's Kagane. His smile just grinning from ear to ear. Finally, something he could eat, he would say to himself, bringing them back into one of the back alleys, where he would plunge his hands into each one of their limbs, pulling out meat, digging into it, just smiling, loving the taste, something that he could finally eat, something that tasted good. So he would say to himself, as he would be chowing down, finally, as soon as his stomach hunger would just dissipate, all of a sudden the shop owner would come around the corner wondering where the two people had gone. Seeing Izuku there with their two bodies, he would chase after him. Izuku would jump onto one of the walls, grabbing onto a street lamp, just throwing himself up onto the rooftop, where finally realization would hit him. What did I just do? He had never killed somebody before. I mean, there was Bakugo, but he was still alive. But now he had killed two humans and ate them. Izuku looked down at his hands, realizing that he was a cannibal. He would shake his head, laughing. No, this can't be. I'm not evil. I'm not a villain. No. Izuku would say, shaking his head, his hands starting to shake, his eyes becoming glassy as tears would fall streaming down his cheeks. He didn't know what to think. Was he in the wrong? Well, of course he was, but he was just a mere child. He didn't know what to think. He could barely think for himself, much less decide if he was going to kill someone or not, basically based on how hungry he was. And as Izuku would stand there, completely in shock, he would end up just running away as he could hear cop sirens in the distance. Back in the forest, Izuku would wander about, finally end up coming across just a bunch of logs and a fallen tree, something that had happened from a storm just a couple of nights ago. He would end up seeing that the tree was basically hollow. No wonder it had fallen. He would climb up into the hollow tree as bugs would scatter, crawling up and down his legs. But he couldn't care. He had nowhere else to go, and he was cold. He needed to get someplace at least that was just a couple degrees warmer, and it happened to be that, no matter how disgusting it may seem to him. As dawn would end up rising, the sun would rise, gleaming down into the young Izuku's face. Waking up, he would end up opening his eyes, seeing the sun shine down. It just was such a sad day to be sunny like this. However, Izuku would wander himself into a city, one of the worst cities in the entire country, or for just crime, that is. So a young 4-year-old child with nothing to lose and no parents at all to find him was really just going to make a target of himself. That's exactly what happened when Izuku got to the city. Constant times, people would rush towards him, pushing him down, bullying him. Constant school children doing the same, bullying the young child for no reason other than that he was homeless. Who were they to decide what Izuku was to be? It wasn't his fault he was homeless. Izuku would think to himself, sitting in a trash pile, where a couple of nights before this, he had just killed one of them, and the bullying would still continue, with them just thinking one of their friends had been murdered, and to cope with this, they would bully Izuku more and more. As Izuku would sit there, his face teary-eyed once again, his crying would start, but would stop as soon as it came. Now was not the time for tears, Izuku would think to himself, telling himself that too. As we cut forward 10 years to see a young Izuku, 15 years old in fact, standing in the middle of an alleyway, cracking his neck before stretching out. It was finally time to go out into the real world and just try to find something. It had been a couple days since he had ate, and he was quite hungry. He had ate a full child earlier, however, that wasn't no full adult, and wouldn't last him for more than just a couple of days. So he decided to scope out the area, since he was newly there, having been chased out of the last town he was in by a bunch of cops. So as soon as he made it there, Zuko would be walking around before seeing a sign. Hey, this way, pointing towards a direction. Hey. What's that? Oh, yeah. Isn't that stupid hero school? Kept hearing about it from young students trying to become heroes. How stupid of them. They really think they're gonna become hero in today's society? No chance. Today's society is just a bunch of corrupt people that only give jobs to the rich. Anyway, a hero freaking abandoned me, even though he was my own father. So, that really tells you a lot. Zuko was holding his hands behind his head, deciding to go scope out UA. It might be a source for him to get pretty decent meat or food if he did have the chance. Walking that way, all of a sudden he would end up remembering that he had to go get something if he was going to just get up and leave his camping spot, as he didn't want another person to try and steal some of his fresh meat that he had recently gotten. Yes, he was saving it, but the thing that he had just killed wasn't exactly the most tasty. So Zuko go out once again, hunting. However, this time it was in the middle of the day, hopefully just to spot out something that would pose a decent meal, at least. As Zuko walked around just the area looking around, his head would scan every which way, where finally he would end up spotting somebody. Walking towards them, he would accidentally bump into them, where they would promptly drop their bag. Zuko would say, "Oh, my mistake. Here, let me get that for you." Bending down, grabbing the book before giving it back to her. "Oh, thank you," she said. "I'm so sorry for bumping into you." "Oh, no, it's my mistake. I wasn't paying attention. Anyways, I'm Izuku," Izuku would say, putting his hand out. "Oh, I'm Chaku Uraka." She would say, grabbing onto his hand and shaking it. "It's nice to meet you." "Oh, it's nice to meet you too." She would say, blushing all over her face before saying, "Oh, if you must excuse me, I gotta go do an exam. I'm really trying to get into UA." "Oh, that's wonderful. I wish you luck," Zuko would say with a bright smile all over his face as she would then rush off. Jeez, this should be quite easy. If I can hopefully run into her again once this UA exam's finished, I might possibly catch myself a quick and easy meal. Catch her with the charm and then finish her off at night, huh? Zuko would say, smirking to himself. As night would roll around, as UA examinees would all be let out of the campus. Uraraka would end up find herself walking out. However, she would be walking out on crutches, having been crushed by a rock. She had sprained her ankle. Luckily, though, a shining blonde-haired hero had happened to save her with a super strong, just overpowered explosion along with a punch to the robot's face. As she would be walking out on crutches, Suk would end up seeing her again. "Oh, it's nice to see you again. If you don't mind me asking, what happened?" "Oh, hi, Zuku." "Yeah, I kinda got injured during the entrance exam for the hero portion." "Oh my, that's terrible. Are you okay?" Zuku would say, lying through his teeth. He couldn't care less. As she would nod her head. "Yeah, I am. I just need help getting to my parents' house." "Oh, would you like me to help you?" "Oh, yes, that'd be wonderful." Whereas Zuku would then help her to her parents' house, holding her bags for her. Once arriving, Zuku would drop her off before leaving. Her parents promptly asking her about him and who he was, and all of this and that. However, as soon as the door would shut, Zuku would immediately realize he had just made a big mistake. "Oh, wait, I was supposed to... I'm so stupid. No wonder I'm so damn hungry all the time. I let Easy Prey get past me every single day." Zuku slamming his fist into his forehead. Getting up, however, Zuku would end up walking back towards his camping spot, where he would end up being shoved into a dumpster, where he would then promptly get up, seeing a thug holding a knife up to his neck. "Come on, buddy, give me all your cash, you know? I'm really in a hard spot. I just need a little bit of extra help, you know?" Zuko would grab the person's hand, digging it deeper into his neck. "This isn't gonna work on me," he would say as the knife's blade would then end up breaking. Zuko would punch the thug right across the face before using one of his tendrils to plunge it right through the guy's stomach, ripping out his heart. The most tastiest part, Zuko would say. The next day, Zuko would just be walking around as normal, and a couple more weeks would end up passing, as Zuko would be sitting on a bench, where he would end up seeing Uraraka walking to UA once again. She would end up sitting down next to him, having she had left early to hopefully try to meet up with him. "Oh, it's nice to see you again, Zuko. I didn't realize you were always on this route. Did you happen to try out for UA, or a school around here?" "Oh, no. I actually dropped out of middle school. I actually dropped out a couple of months back, you know. It really just school wasn't my thing. I decided to take my chances, and, it sort of worked out. At least you could say that," Zuko would say, smiling. Uraraka would then smile towards him as well. "You know, my ankle really hasn't healed all that much since the last time we saw each other. Do you mind walking me to school?" "Oh, sure," Zuko would say, responding to her, bringing her back to school, where they would then end up leaving, saying each other their goodbyes, where Uraraka would end up asking him if he happened to have a smartphone so they could exchange numbers. Zuko would just sort of smile before shaking his head. Times have been kind of tough recently, you know. I haven't really been able to buy one. You know, maybe I'll get lucky. I'll get a job and buy one so we can continue talking to each other, you know?" Zuko would say before bidding her farewell, as Zuko would end up just looking at himself. "I wonder where this is gonna go." He would continue walking under an overpass, where all of a sudden a massive sludge villain would end up interrupting his walking. Finally! Something I can spot," he would say, looking towards Zuko. Zuko would look over towards him. "What?" Say, as all of this under the sludge villain would jet its arms towards him, trying to capture Izuku, who would easily dodge this, as his Kagane would end up going out. These four tendrils all out, just as these limbs would fly out, jetting towards the eyes, stabbing them instantly, pulling them out of the sludge, where it would then completely just materialize, completely just falling to the ground, seeping into the road. You really think I wouldn't kill you just because I'm some kid? Trust me, I've killed so many more people than you might think. Zuko was walking away, as I end up sighing once again. This life is such a pain in the ass, he would mumble to himself. As he would be walking, though, off the sun, he would end up seeing a sign for a run-down-looking bar. He would walk over towards it, seeing that they were offering a position for a janitor spot. As he would end up walking over towards it, he would kick open the door before walking in. Sitting down on the stool, he would end up looking over towards a person next to him. The person would be staring at him, sort of wondering what he was doing there, as well as glaring. "What are you doing here?" he would say with a raspy voice before scratching his neck violently. "Yeah, I saw something about a job opportunity here. I really need the money," Izuku would say towards them. "Oh, yes, right. The janitor position. Look, it's already filled, so can you please just leave?" Izuku would look towards him, right into his eyes, before looking at him once again. "Look, I'll tell you this one more time. I need a job, alright? So, if you're not willing to give me that, I'll go ahead and kill you. If you are willing to give me it, say I'll spare your life." "Oh, really?" Shigaraki would say, challenging him, as Izuku would smile towards him. Yes, I will." Promptly, though, Shigaraki would end up racing towards him, as all 5 of his fingers out, where someone would end up intervening. Kurogiri, intervening, would end up looking towards Izuku. "Sir, please leave. We don't need any of this right now." Izuku looking towards the person, looking for any part of a body that Izuku could use to sort of injure Kurogiri to possibly win the fight, but he couldn't. And being quite a smart problem-solving person, Izuku would just leave it there, saying, "Fine. You guys are really losing quite a good janitor, you know." It's before walking out. As Kurogiri would end up looking towards Shigaraki, would end up wondering why Shigaraki had declined it. "Why'd you decline that, kid? You know, we probably would have made a good Nomu." "Nah, he's too young. A Nomu should probably be older and smarter than that kid. Barging in here, kicking the door open. They're not gonna make a good Nomu at all. They're just going to make stupid decisions and probably disobey me. That's why I didn't pick him." "Oh, alright then." Izuku, shaking his head, would end up stumbling around further, walking around looking for another job opportunity, to which he would end up finding himself sitting in an alleyway where a door would end up opening up, a secret door that was probably being concealed by some sort of cork. A sort of scientist would walk out, not caring for Izuku there, thinking he was just sort of alcohol-addicted thug that wasn't going to do much. However, Izuku, seeing the opportunity, would get up, just waving his hand in front of the door, where it would then open. Walking into the all-white room, Izuku would marvel at its beauty before walking in, where getting dirt everywhere wasn't to the favor of one of the leaders of this group. Overhaul would end up walking towards him before yelling at him, "Why are you getting all this dirt everywhere?" He would peeling back one of his gloves, reaching towards Izuku. Overhaul would race towards Izuku, his fingers out, about to touch him as Izuku would dodge this attack, looking towards him. He would ask him to calm down. He just wants a job. As he would end up saying this, Overhaul would stand up, putting his glove back on, before saying, "Do you know how to clean things?" Yeah, I think so. Izuku would say, quite nervous of the leader's just actions towards him, immediately going to attack him, even though he had no idea what Izuku's quirk even was. And because of this, Overhaul would just go and hand him a mop and some water to wash up everything that he was doing and just getting dirty. Where for the next couple of weeks, Izuku would basically just become the janitor for Overhaul's base, which is honestly quite strange, but it actually did end up happening, with him just mopping around, earning some few extra dollars, and by the end of it, he had $3,000 in his wallet, or basically just in his pocket. He couldn't afford a wallet. Well, I guess now he could. So with these $3,000, Izuku would go up to just some phone store, say Apple or Samsung, and would buy one of the cheaper phones he could find, one that was, say, maybe $300, trying to budget out his just expenses. So with that, Izuku would having his phone, and he would end up walking around UA, waiting for Uraraka to show up, where they would end up exchanging numbers with Izuku, saying that he finally was able to get a phone, and Izuku would end up as well hearing about just how Uraraka's family was struggling, and that her rent was about to basically just go up, and they couldn't pay it anymore. And Izuku, of course, being still deep down nice, but having just this ghoul side of him that constantly was dragging him down, dragging his humanity away. And Uraraka was kind of like the light of that, as you have two sides of Izuku. The just happy, normal side, and the ghoul side. The ghoul side of him's dragging him down away from his happier human side, taking away his humanity slowly. And then you have Uraraka on that human side, keeping him over there, keeping him in sort of a balance. So with that, Izuku would just give Uraraka some money to help her pay some of the bills. So as Izuku would be back to just one of his camping spots, he would up just thinking for a moment before going over to Home Depot, buying a couple of 2x4s and an axe before heading out into just a forest where he would see a bunch of trees scattered in some sort of pattern. Chopping down a couple of trees, he would make a square before lining up these 2x4s just to be as sort of a line. This line would then help Izuku just mark out where he was going to build his house. This would be a log cabin of the sorts, as he would be placing mud in between the logs to make them stick together. And when he was done, he would use the 2x4s as sort of an easy roof, so he didn't have to chop all of the logs in half. So with Izuku now having a house, his life was seemingly about to turn around, and that's how it seemed, up until one fateful evening, where Izuku would be walking out on the street. As he was walking, all of a sudden, a lady would to bumping into him. As this lady would bump into him, wearing all these nice fancy clothes, Izuku would immediately get up, holding her purse, and was trying to hand it back to her. "Hey, lady, I'm sorry for that. Here's your..." But before he could even speak at all, the lady would jump up, immediately yelling, "You! Why do you have my purse? Thief! You're a thief! Help!" Just yelling all these drastic and crazy things, as Izuku would stand there, his eyes widened, just wondering, what? No, that's not it at all. But before he could even speak, a hero would tackle him to the floor, elbowing him in the back of the neck, yelling, "Let go of the damn purse, let me see your hands." As Izuku would slowly put his hands up onto the ground, his arms shaking, wondering why was this happening. He had the power to defend himself, but something was holding him back. as Izuku would end up being knocked out by the hero and would be placed in handcuffs, as a cop car would be called, taking Izuku down to the police station where he would be put in a holding cell. As Izuku would be sitting there, his eyes would be staring at the floor, all staggered and kind of looking like he was going insane. He didn't mean to do anything. He was just trying to help. Here he was trying to change his life around. He had been homeless for 11 long, grueling years. And here he was, trying to turn his life around, trying to change things for the better, trying not to be the human killer that he has to be, trying not to, starving himself so he doesn't have to kill, having all of this going against him. And now this, someone lying, not listening to the situation, and calling Izuku a thief. And now he's in jail. Why? No one cared for him. He had been abandoned, and now these people are treating him like a monster, like an animal. Changing for the good, no one was going to be there for them. No one was going to help him or just reward him for any of this. And even if there was a reward, that wouldn't change things. Nothing's going to change about his life. So why change? Why change for the good when that's not going to change your life at all? It's not going to change how bad it is. So why change? Those are the thoughts Izuku would go through as he would be sitting there. And when his trial came up, he would be sentenced for robbery. And because of that, he would find himself in jail for just around a year. His cell phone lying in his log cabin, him stuck in jail for a year being tried as an adult, and because of that, he was stuck in jail. And as a year would fly by, Uraraka would forget about him, just completely not remembering who he was. Sure, she would remember, but he hadn't contacted her in a year. She would try to contact him again, but it wouldn't work out. So because of this, as Uku would get out, he would get out changed. He was a lot more physically stronger and stronger mentally as well. Well, depends how you look at it. During his time in prison, he had been broken and beaten down, just treated like he was nothing. Because of how young he was treated as sort of an easy target. But he was still tough. As he would be winning all of these fights, it would change how he acted. It would change who he was. And now, he didn't care. He saw what the system was. He saw how it was like. And now, it didn't correct him, even though it was supposed to be a correctional facility. And now, look where he was. Back out on the streets, nowhere to go, and now he's just going to become a criminal again. So, as Uku would be walking along the streets, he would walk past UA. Memories flooding back to his mind, he would stare up towards it, before he would end up hiding behind a gate, hearing a couple group of students talking as they left the gates of UA, using their student IDs to open the doors before walking out. Izuku would follow him from behind, as he'd be following them, just slowly inching past them. All of a sudden, they would end up splitting up, as he would see one of them going on to their phone, calling their parents to hopefully maybe come and pick them up. However, Izuku would inch closer and closer, hearing the conversation more, as his eyes would turn blood red, as the rest of his eye, the white part of it, turning completely black, as Kagane would injecting out. 4 tendrils would be out. These tentacles would then fly, stabbing through the victim all together. Someone would slam their phone down. Still one number to go before calling any number, as Izuku would stand there smiling, before he would end up grabbing them, just having them by their neck, and pull them into an alleyway before finally getting a real meal. You see, Izuku's quirk allowed him to eat human flesh, and it basically made him have to eat it. However, there was something slightly different about this ghoul than normal ghouls in Tokyo Ghoul. The Tokyo Ghoul ghouls are basically kind of like aliens. However, Izuku is still a human just with a different quirk, meaning although normal food like that, every other food tastes disgusting to him, he can still eat it without getting sick. Sure, he might throw up a couple of times if the food's just that disgusting to him, but he can still eat it and he can still survive. So as Izuku would stand there in the alleyway after finishing his meal, he would end up walking out of it, blood riddled all over his arms. So he would take half of it off, but he couldn't. As he would be walking down the street, all of this yellow-haired man, skeleton-looking person would end up seeing him, blood all over his arms as Izuku would walk past him. The man would stop Izuku. "Hey, kid, are you alright?" he would say, his arm on his shoulder. Izuku would merely just shrug him off. Yeah, I am," before walking back out of the city, slowly walking along, having nothing better to do, where he would eventually make it to his log cabin. That, unfortunately, had been raided, destroyed by probably a couple of middle school or high schoolers, and because of this, Izuku would sit down on it, just staring up at the sky, much like he had done just a year prior in that jail cell. Nowhere to go, nothing to do. He would walk back into the city, walking back to that same bar that had a job listing just about a year ago. When he would open up the door, he would see a couple of people sitting there just at the bar, where he would see Dabi, Toga, and Shigaraki. A couple of the members had joined too, being, I believe, Magni and Spinner. However, they just weren't there at the moment, off on another mission. As Izuku would walk in, his hair long and tangled, he would sit down or asking for some water. As if he had been there before, Kirogiri would slide him a glass before asking what he brings him there again. "Look, I knew you guys were a villain organization. I think I just wasn't ready to join yet. So how about it? Y'all are still offering a position for a janitor, huh?" Shigaraki would stare at him, sort of intently, wondering, should I accept this? Is it really worth it? And finally he just decided, what the hell. Sure, you can join. Our past raids on UA, they didn't work out too well anyway. Maybe with you, an extra, they might work out. But let's see your skills, Shigaraki would say, cracking his fingers before lunging towards Izuku, as Izuku would dodge this, slapping Shigaraki's both hands away before grabbing onto his wrists, flipping him over, slamming him down onto one of the tables, completely destroying it instantly. Dabi and Toga would both stare at before Toga would get up. "Wow, that's impressive," she would say, looking at Shigaraki, who would be groaning in pain before getting up off of the table. The timbers of the table would chip off. Shigaraki would hold his back, nodding. "Yeah, alright, I guess you can join. You joined quite possibly right at the right time. We were just about to leave to go raid UA. See, they're up at a training camp right now, up in who knows where, some random mountaintop. And, you know, we're gonna raid them. Yeah. Hopefully, we're trying to capture a Bakugo Katsuki. You look quite young. Do you happen to know who he is?" Bakugo. Nope, no idea. Yeah. No idea, huh? That's alright. So, Bakugo Katsuki, we're looking for him, and hopefully any other student you deem strong enough for us to kidnap, alright? See, we're just trying to get as much strong students as possible that possibly look strong and evil to hopefully brainwash them or switch them to become villains. Izuku would end up hearing this as he would nod his head. Alright. So, do I need to learn any plans? Nope, just go up there, fight the students, and try to capture them, alright? Alright. Sounds simple enough to me. Izuku would say, as a portal would open up. Whoever Izuku was about to hop through it, Dabi would stop him. Here, let me go light the forest on fire first. You can go in next. A few moments later, Dobby's hand would come through the portal with a thumbs up, as Izuku and Shigaraki would give the go-ahead, as Izuku and Toga, along with Shigaraki, would all hop through the portal, as Magni, Spinner, and Mr. Compress, all who had just arrived as well, would hop through the portal as well, as the raid on the UA summer training camp would then begin. Deku steps out of the portal, looking around, just seeing a blank forest. As the smell of smoke fills his nostrils, he looks up to see that blue fire blanketed the sky above him. The entire forest was on fire. As Izuku saw this, he would end up taking a couple steps forward before looking back towards the other villains behind him. He would mention towards them that they likely only had a good 20 minutes to go in and find Bakugo and then get out. If not, they most likely would all die, either by just breathing in too much smoke or by being burned alive. The rest of the villains would note this before scattering out, going off to look for Bakugo Katsuki. Izuku would go off looking for him as well, as he would be stumbling around just the different forest area, hopping around from tree branch to tree branch, when all of a sudden he would stop. Hearing talking, Izuku would end up covering his face with a mask that he had been given by one of the villains there, just to conceal his identity. It's basically just a mask that doesn't cover any of his eyes, just covers his mouth, so that they can't really identify him without 50% of his face. Plus, since his eyes change when he activates his quirk, they really can't identify him at all. So, as Izuku's eyes would change, completely going black with a little bit of red shining in the night, he would stare down towards them when the sun to the two girls sitting down there, being Tsuyu Asui and Ochaku Uraraka, would both get a bad feeling about what was going on. Izuku's stomach would rumble before he would jump down, his Kagane activated as all four tentacles would be flaring in the wind. He would land down for both of them, as both of them would stare on in shock, wondering, what was this thing? Izuku would stare towards both of them, his green hair flowing in the wind before he would use one of his tentacles to grab onto Asui, throwing her back into a tree. Slapping her back, she would hit her head on one of the tree branches with a loud thud. She would fall to the ground unconscious. As she would be on the ground, Uraraka would look towards Izuku before she would end up recognizing the same green hair. Wait, Izuku? Izuku would stare towards her, but having been in prison, he had completely lost his sense of self, forgetting about almost all of his voice freezing that his parents had taught him for those 4 years, and that's pretty much exactly why he had became a villain, losing his true sense of who he was, and losing his morals, and just all of this, being corrupted, being so young, being so molded by the prison that he had turned just completely different from what he had been taught to be from the hero family that he was raised in. As Izuku would stand there looking towards Uraraka, a slight sense of familiarity would rush over his mind, but he couldn't really sense to figure it out at all. He would look towards her before shaking his head, rushing towards her, punching her right in the gut, sending her flying upwards. She would all down to the ground, or looking at him once again. Izuku, is that you? She would ask once more. However, Izuku wouldn't give her the much-needed answer she wanted. Getting frustrated, she would charge him right before Toga would jump in, tackling her to the ground. As it would be she would end up sticking one of her syringes right into her, sucking out some of her blood to use for her quirk, before transforming into Uraraka and jumping out, thanking Izuku for letting her do that, as Izuku would just stare down towards Uraraka. As she was on the ground, Izuku would stand over her, using some of his Kagane, just slamming him into the ground right by her head, as if trying to completely just kill her, which she would easily dodge by this, as Izuku would jump back, landing onto a tree branch. He would smile towards her, although she couldn't see it. "You're lucky. I'll spare you this one time." He would open his eyes looking towards her. "But don't ever try to challenge me again, or else you'll end up like your friend over there." As Suku would jump away, merely just bluffing, she would rush over towards Asui, checking her pulse, finding that luckily she was still alive. However, it was just faint, and she had definitely had a head injury from being harshly slammed into that tree trunk. As Izuku would continue hopping off, all of a sudden a massive explosion could be seen in the distance. He would rush towards it to see fire just enveloping the entire forest, as half the trees were already burned almost completely. As Izuku would see this, Bakugo, with orange lightning enveloped all around his arms, would be beating the absolute crap out of Dabi, as Shigaraki would be taken care of by Todoroki. As both of them would be losing, Izuku would interject, jumping in as his eyes would be completely glowing. He would slam Bakugo's head right into the floor, holding it up, as Bakugo would stare towards him, having not been hit basically the entire fight, having just such a power boost by One for All that he was basically just unstoppable. As Izuku would slam him down into the ground, Bakugo's head would cock backwards before getting up. What the hell was that? He'd say, holding his head. However, Izuku would have grabbed Dabi by then, before rushing over, kicking Todoroki right in the head, who was still in shock by seeing a new villain there. With both of them on the ground, Izuku would grab the both unconscious Dabi and Shigaraki before yelling for Kirogiri to open up a portal. He would, as all three of them would jump through it, leaving many of the other villains behind to get captured. As Izuku would sit there catching his breath, all of a sudden he would yell for Kirogiri to open up another portal. He would ask Izuku if he was sure, however Izuku would only nod towards him. Izuku would jump through looking for four more villains: Muscular, Toga, Spinner, and Magni. So as he would look for them, all of a sudden he would rush across Uraraka. However, Izuku knew who this just happened to be. Toga. Izuku would coordinate her before Todoroki would open up a portal. Both of them would walk through it, as he now would be standing there without Bakugo and without having been successful at all. Izuku all of a sudden would hear his name called, as a TV would have a camera turn on. Izuku would walk over towards it, looking on to the just strange figure, the camera all blurry to make sure nothing was identifiable. "Why did you pull all of them out? They clearly had a mission to do. Know you're new here and all, but that doesn't excuse this behavior." "Well, they all would have died if I didn't do so. 2 UA students were completely beating them. Both of them were unconscious. It's clear that they didn't have proper training or weren't prepared for this at all. I suggest if we want to just be more upfront with this, we have a full-scale attack on UA. However, it'd be when they're least expecting it." All for One would stare on towards Izuku, wondering, is he really sure? If Izuku was completely sure about this, as he was still just a kid. He didn't know any better, and plus this full frontal scale attack would basically be a death wish. If it doesn't work out, they're all going to be stuck in prison, likely forever, and when they get out, they'll likely never be able to use their quirks again, just having quirk monitors on them at all times to make sure they don't do anything stupid. So, as Izuku would tell All for One to this, he would look towards him before asking what he meant by this. "A full final attack, huh? Alright. I'll surely think about this. It would be quite the risky opportunity, but it might be a worthy one at that. Hopefully." All for One would then shut off the camera as Izuku would sit back down. As we cut forward a couple days, Suzuki would be walking out of just the villain hideout. He would be walking down the streets, still having his stomach grumble. He would put on his mask or jumping from rooftop to rooftop, when all of this and he would stumble upon a striking voice. Stopping dead in his tracks, he would stare behind him towards the alleyway, hearing someone speaking. And this person speaking would be Endeavor. Endeavor would be staring down the hero killer as Izuku would be hearing this. Listening to it, he would sit on the ledge of the building as Stain would already have sensed him. He would look up to him once, however, would continue to stare towards Endeavor, as Endeavor would finally stop giving a stupid speech about how Stain should just stop giving up a fight. He would rush towards Stain with a fireball in his hand, charging towards him, about to slam it right into his stomach. However, Stain would quickly dodge this, slamming his sword into one of Endeavor's arms, would then counter this with another fire blast right to the side of Stain's head. As Stain would do this, or as Endeavor would do this, Izuku would drop down, staring towards the both of them. Well, Stain, I think you've had enough fun for today. You know you won't want to die. So, I guess you're just gonna have to come with me, huh? Izuku would ask this as Stain would look towards Izuku. Hearing this, he would laugh, before Izuku's Kagane would activate, sending all 4 tendrils right into the stomach of Endeavor. He would fall to his knees, choking on some of the blood, wondering who Izuku was. As Izuku would walk over towards Endeavor, laughing. Huh. Oh, I don't have a name, huh? It's a shame, really. Why don't you ask my father? Dragonite, he would say, as Endeavor's face would up, just completely owing, just shocked, completely silent, as he would fall to the ground in pain. As he would fall to the ground, Izuku would look over towards Stain, who was completely unconscious. Izuku would drag both Endeavor's body along with Stain's towards just the front sidewalk of the street he was on. Izuku would look towards Endeavor's body, seeing that hole was bleeding, as he would end up grabbing onto a chunk of skin, tearing it off before starting to munch on it, just as something to satisfy his hunger for a good few hours before he went out hunting again. As Izuku knew Endeavor was going to die. However, Izuku also wanted him to still be alive long enough for him to tell the police who did it to him. And when he says Dragon Knight's son, it would only just make it even better. So as Izuku would walk back towards just the villain hideout with the unconscious Stain in his arms, he would slam it onto one of the bar tables, as all of the members still there would look on, just wondering where Izuku had just found Stain. Shigaraki would stand up before asking Izuku what the hell just happened. I found him fighting Endeavor, so I killed him and just brought him Stain here. You killed Endeavor? Many of them would say, which Izuku would immediately shoot this down. Yeah, but it really was just a surprise attack. It's really nothing special. Anyone could have done it. Anyways, I'm leaving again. I'm quite hungry. Izuku would say, walking out before he would end up stumbling upon just a couple of people standing out in an alleyway. They seemed quite young, however, Izuku didn't care, walking up to a couple of them with blood all over his mouth as he forgot to put back his mask. Izuku would stare towards them, his teeth stained red. He would smile towards them, a demonic smile. As the kids, seeing that, many of them would run away, having their fight or flight just activates with them just running. However, one of them just happened to be one of the unlucky few that would be frozen, stuck in place, not able to move. As Izuku would walk over towards him, grabbing him by the neck, before just starting to just chow down, eating as much as he could, saving an arm as he would tear out some of the meat, putting it into an envelope to save for later. As Izuku would get back to the bar, he would sit down as his stomach would still be slightly hungry, wanting to be full so he didn't have to eat for another couple of days. Izuku would open up the package with the raw meat sitting there right in front of him. Many of them would gather around asking Izuku what it was. As Izuku would ask them if they wanted some, which all of them besides Toga would of course say no, of course not. Toga of course would say yes, having just a fascination with blood, so Izuku would give it to her. She would try it and would wonder what it happened to be. So, what is this thing? Oh, it's human. Yeah. Izuku would, as Toga would look towards him laughing. Yeah, you can't be serious, right? Oh no, it is. That's one of the drawbacks of my quirk. I can eat human things. They just taste disgusting. This is one of the only things I actually am capable of eating that tastes decent, I guess. Toga would look towards him, wondering if he was really true. However, she just wouldn't decide to press it much longer. We cut back to Endeavor as the police would end up arriving on the scene, having just been called by Endeavor moments before he had encountered Stain. Once they would arrive there, they would be looking on towards Endeavor, whose dying moments were within just arm's grasp. As he would be sitting there, the police officers would rush over to him, asking him, "Endeavor, who did this to you?" He called himself Dragonite's son. Dragonite, what do you say about the recent rumors that your son killed Endeavor? Oh, all of those are just a bunch of bogus. I haven't seen my son in 11 years, so whoever that was, they weren't my son. Izuku, along with all the rest of the League of Villains, would be sitting around the table, watching as the TV and the news would continue rolling. Izuku would sit there with a small smirk on his face, watching as his father would continue rambling on about how he wasn't his son at all. But we do have a description of the suspect. He had just vibrant green hair and eyes, both of which your son was reported to have at his age. Yes, but all of that could have been changed. What if it was just dyed? Well, yes, that is true, hair can be dyed, but that doesn't distinguish the eye color, though, does it? Dragonite would stop talking before basically being backed into a corner by the reporter. He would wave him off, saying that he's had enough of questions before jumping off to go fight a bunch more villains. As Izuku would sit there now, fully smiling. He really thinks he can just blatantly push off that I'm his son, huh? That's astonishing. Izuku would to himself, shaking his head, completely just in awe how his father really was going to do that. Of course, it was to protect his family, and this was the same person that had just abandoned him 11 years earlier, so it really isn't much of a surprise. However, Izuku would just make it even more sweet when they would end up meeting eventually soon. As Izuku would there, he would turn towards Dabi before asking them when their training begins. As Dabi would look towards him, he would say, "Well, we do have a couple years until Yue's graduation ceremony for this next coming class. So, why don't we go ahead and do it?" Well, yes, we could wait till the class of the first years graduate now. But how about this? We do it at the end of this year. So the graduating class happens, and there's only one more class, and there wouldn't be another Class 1A, only this one. We attack it, destroy UA, no more UA. There was only those 3 classes. 2 of them can't graduate and become heroes because they don't have their full hero licenses and diplomas from UA. If we do that, we could be perfect. And if we stop, or if we do it a couple weeks before the final exams for that year, then we just so might happen to cut off 3 years worth of students from becoming heroes. Suki would say, looking around as all of them would nod their heads before standing up. That would mean we'd have to start training right now, wouldn't it? Precisely. Zuko would respond as they would all go down to the training quarters to instantly start sparring with each other. Almost instantly, though, it would realize that Izuku far outmatched all of them, as the gym and weights down there had basically only been used by him, as he had already been there for just around a couple of days now, and he was the only one that had ever touched any of them. And because of this, he was already stronger than them even in those 2 days, and even because Izuku had been to prison and had been working out there, he had just established the habit, making himself far stronger than all of them there. So when they would all try to spar him, he would easily one by one knock them down, regardless of what their quirk was. If it was fire, if it was just a blood quirk or Shigaraki's quirk, Izuku would beat them easily. As with his just enhanced speed and strength, he was easily able to dodge all of their attacks while getting in close with his Kagane, and would simulate a finishing blow, killing them. Izuku also would tell them they have to get past killing people. If they're going to become real villains, they're going to have to kill. And because of that, and because of what's going to happen at UA, they really are just going to have to get besides that fact. As Izuku would be sitting there, as the rest of them would be doing that, we cut over to Ochako Uraraka sitting with a chair right next to Nezu. As Nezu would stare across from his table, seeing Uraraka sitting there, he would start asking her a couple of questions. So you're telling me that this kid that supposedly attacked us during the summer training camp, you know him? Yes, I do. I talked to him quite a bit before I was accepted into UA. His name, he said it was Izuku. Izuku. Nezu would turn towards his computer before typing in a bunch of keys. As he would click enter, there was only one reported case of an Izuku anywhere, and that Izuku was Izuku Midoriya. Nezu would look towards Uraraka with a suspicious glance, asking her, "So, Uraraka, what might have been this Izuku's last name?" Oh, it was, if I remember correctly, wait, he didn't say his last name, he just said his first one. Well, it says here he's Izuku Midoriya of the Midoriya family. His father is the hero Dragonite, so it does appear these rumors about him killing Endeavor are true. It's quite a shame how powerful he is. He would have made a great hero. It doesn't have a file of his quirk, though, either, which is also quite mysterious. He would say, as we now cut forward another couple of months to see Izuku and the rest of the League of Villains, now with a couple more members, all having just cloaks all over their body, these black shadowy cloaks guarding their face and shielding them from being recognized. As all of them would hop through Kirogiri's portal, they would then appear right outside of UA, as would then have Kirogiri make some portal, getting them onto the other side without even just causing any alarms to be just sounded. As this would be happening, thunder would strike overhead as it would begin pouring rain. However, they wouldn't bother with this, with any of the newer recruits rushing around, just deactivating all the alarms. These electrical villains easily just completely shocking them and frying them so that they wouldn't function. And they would all rush around before eventually one of them would sound the alarm. Heroes would jump into action as the teachers would all rush outside, seeing many of not heroes, while the UA students would all rush outside. There wasn't any heroes on campus besides maybe a select few. Many of them still were living off campus in other quarters. And because of this, now stood an army of UA hero students against the League of Villains. Izuku would stand there facing off, staring on towards all of them, walking back, disappearing into the crowd, as his eyes would catch that of Uraraka's. As Uraraka would see this, she would rush towards the crowd along with the rest of the UA students. However, she would end up disappearing, running to the side. Following Izuku, Suzuki would completely go back into the crowd, going towards the back. He would continue walking out, where Uraraka would end up tackling him to the ground, now far off from the rest of the massive battle. As Uraraka would tackle him, she would go to punch him across the face. However, his Kagane would block the punch easily. Uraraka, you're gonna have to try harder than that, Izuku would say, now fully remembering who she was. Her face now this close to him, he could remember. Flipping her off of him, Izuku would stand up before staring at her. Do you remember what I said to you at that forest? No, why? I said I'd kill you if you ever challenged me, Izuku would say as Uraraka would get up before his Kagane would go right through her stomach, lifting her up, as she would just be shocked. Blood dripping down from the wound, she would stand there, her legs and arms kicking about, flopping all around, struggling to survive as she would start breathing in deeper and deeper, as blood would start rising up from her mouth, spewing over. As be doing this, Izuku would look towards her before smiling. You've always been a pain in the back of my mind, Izuku would say before plunging another one of his tendrils right through her stomach, and then another, as would be sitting there, or Izuku would release all of them, the Kagane going back, just withdrawing it. Suzuki would walk up towards her. She would stand there, her massive wound eeping. Suzuki would sit there looking towards her before smiling. Thank God it's finally over, Suzuki would say, grabbing her by her hair before kneeing her right in the chest as she would fall to the floor unconscious. Bakugo, who had managed to get through many of the villains, would now be staring there, looking towards Uraraka, seeing Izuku standing over her. Her knocked out unconscious body would be under Izuku. Bakugo, instantly activating One for All, would rush towards Izuku, going for an explosion. However, it would easily be blocked by Izuku's Kagane. You're gonna have to try harder than that, Bakugo. I could sense you from a mile away. Your anger, it blows right out of you. So much so that I could sense you the very minute I walked through those gates. Turning around right towards Bakugo, punching him across the face with such speed Bakugo didn't even have the time to react. Bakugo would sit there wondering what the hell just happened, as Suzuki would just punch him once again. Come on, Bakugo, you're better than this. As Bakugo would jump backwards, using his explosions before racing towards Izuku, sending 3 barrages of explosions right onto Izuku's body, all landing direct hits. However, when the smoke would clear, Izuku would stand there completely unharmed. Izuku would smile towards him before laughing. You really have grown weak. That One for All of yours, if I'm not mistaken, All Might's quirk. It's making you a failure. You haven't had to work hard enough for the things you've been given. You've been given everything in your life, and you haven't worked for anything. Izuku would say, his eyes glowing, just complete black, so the red would shine through the night, the rain pounding onto his skin. Izuku's Kagane would out racing towards Bakugo once again, punching him before Bakugo would send an explosion right through his gut, this time so much faster, so much harder. This, with a combined punch, would send Izuku flying backwards right through a brick wall. Izuku slamming down, he would fall to the ground. As Izuku falling to the ground, Bakugo would walk over towards him, grabbing him by his hair, slamming multiple explosions right into his face. He would continually do this on repeat. Suzuki would continue to feel this before being dropped by Bakugo. After being dropped, Suzuki would get up slowly, wobbling on his feet, having not had competition like this in years. Suzuki would stand there wobbling, smiling with blood melted into his teeth. He would race towards Uraraka's body as Bakugo would do the same. Izuku would grab Uraraka's body before biting her right across the shoulder. And Izuku would start regenerating even faster, as he basically had Kaneki's entire Ghoul system. He was basically kind of like Kaneki, and because of this he had the regeneration most ghouls in Tokyo Ghoul don't. Izuku would easily regenerate completely back to 100%. He would look towards Bakugo, or all of this, and Aizawa would come out of nowhere, and so would All Might. The two would surround Izuku, and Bakugo would do the same. All Might would go into a punching Izuku, sending him flying upwards, as Bakugo would slam an explosion into Izuku's back, sending him flying back down, slamming into the ground. As this would happen, Aizawa would erase Izuku's quirk. However, as the dust would clear, Izuku would stand up, his quirk still completely active. It was a mutation quirk, and therefore Aizawa couldn't erase it. Izuku would race towards Aizawa before plunging all four of his tendrils right through his stomach, doing it so quickly before he would drop Aizawa's body to the floor. As he would turn towards All Might, he would stab it through All Might's chest, breaking into its ribcage and yanking out his lungs. Dropping them to the floor, Bakugo staring at this, Izuku would turn towards him, as All for One would then appear in a portal. "I think that's enough, Izuku," he would say, patting him on the shoulder, turning towards all of them, as All for One would see that the army of his villains had almost been defeated by all of the UA students. There were still a select few left, which would all be thrown through a portal, going back towards just the warehouse that he was at. He would look down towards Izuku, being his strongest member, asking him if he would just leave. To which Izuku said he couldn't. This wasn't who he was. As he would end up looking towards the massive horde of UA students racing towards him, before Izuku would end up smiling. "I don't care if I die here, as long as I go out fighting. I suggest you go back towards the warehouse. This isn't your fight anymore, All for One," Izuku would say, opening up his eyes, racing towards the massive horde of UA students, as All for One would nod his head. I know you're gonna survive this, Izuku. I just don't know where you'll be afterwards," would say, disappearing into a portal, as Izuku would race on towards all of them, for using his Kagane so well, using it to his advantage, spiking into the ground, completely swiftly changing his direction, killing hundreds of students with ease, sort of like Madara's fight in one of the Ninja Wars, how he was easily able to combat all of the attacks, how they would go in with sort of a sword or kunai, and he would easily disarm them before knocking them out. Izuku would be doing the exact same, except killing them. As Izuku would be doing this, finally, only a select few would remain, this being the severely weakened Uraraka, who had somehow miraculously been healed by Recovery Girl and Bakugo. Uraraka, having such a massive injury healed, would be completely just asleep. As Izuku, smiling towards this, seeing that she was asleep, Izuku would race towards her before stopping. He would stop a moment before smiling towards both Bakugo and to the rest of just the UA students, being Todoroki, Mirio, and Nejire, the last to survive. As Izuku would end up smiling. "I don't understand this at all, but somehow my quirk can spread," Izuku would say, laughing. As he'd be laughing, Uraraka would stand up. As her eyes would glow up red, she would stare towards Izuku before racing towards him, stabbing her hand right through his chest. As Izuku would smile towards it as the rain would drip down onto him, Izuku would look back towards Uraraka before smiling. Uraraka, if only you knew what was going to happen next. And just like that, Izuku was gone, disappeared into the shadows, as Uraraka would completely collapse once more, completely void of all energy, barely having enough to even stand up for the sneak attack. As Izuku was gone, he would end up watching from the shadows as Uraraka would end up just being placed in a hospital, and all the food they came to give her, she would try to eat, but would only merely just throw it up afterwards. It was disgusting. It was putrid to her. She didn't understand it at all. As she would be doing this, Izuku would end up appearing before her bedside, just swift opening up the window so fast she didn't see him. You know, Uraraka, I'd stop eating all that food. It's not going to taste good anymore to you. Sadly, some of my blood managed to get into one of your wounds. That transferred my quirk into yours. Your gravity quirk's been completely destroyed and mutated into mine. You now have a ghoul quirk. You have to eat human flesh to survive and maintain your strength. Well, technically not. You could still eat human food. But it's very hard to survive on it. Trust me. I had to survive on it for a year. I'll let you go out with that, alright? Izuku would say before disappearing once again. Uraraka at him, or all of a sudden something would appear on her bedside. She would grab it before blood would drip out of it. She would look towards it as her eyes would then become completely black. She would see it before completely devouring it, just so hungry she couldn't even think anymore. Basically getting into a state that Izuku had once been in. As Izuku had then seen at Izuku would smile. We cut forward 5 years as Izuku had left the League of Villains, and it had basically been hunted to extinction. All for One still was out there, however, had decided that it was best to stop planning for a couple years, as the One for All person, being Bakugo, was still alive, and he had to find out where Bakugo happened to be, who was just exactly the number one hero and all. He was just very elusive. He wasn't like All Might, he hated the cameras, sort of like a mix of All Might and Endeavor. As Izuku would stand on top of a ledge, would end up looking down to see Uraraka right by his side. The two ended up meeting up together. So we cut back, Uraraka would end up leaving the hospital, and with UA completely destroyed and in ruins, she had nowhere else to go. She would go back towards her parents, but when she told them what she had heard and what had happened, they had basically disowned her. Although they loved her, they couldn't deal with someone who was going to be a murderer or a cannibal. And because of that, she was disowned. And after just a couple of months of distress, she sought out Izuku, where they would both end up becoming sort of a villainous team, striking back at Bakugo. However, they weren't at all just dating or anything. They were basically kind of like brother and sister, as Izuku's blood had mutated, molding with Uraraka, turning her into a ghoul. And because of this, he had the ghoul-like quirk, and they would both continue to elude both Bakugo and the police. As this illusion would continue, both of them would end up just eluding them so much that it was just sad. Much like Bakugo, they would just run around killing people, eating them before disappearing into the night. Finally, however, Izuku would end up looking towards her. Do you think we should start spreading the quirk? He would ask towards her, as she would end up looking towards him. What do you mean? I did a study on something. When I broke into one of the science labs at UA during that time, I found something. It said that quirks were starting to go extinct. As quickly as they came, they were starting to disappear. You know how the quirkless population was only 20% just a couple of years ago? it's risen to over 40. Zuko would say towards her. She would look completely astonished and surprised. So what do you mean? I mean that perhaps with the spreading ability of this quirk, this quirk could live on far past our deaths. It could become far stronger than we ever wished to be in this lifetime. Considering you ruined my life once, I guess, you know what? Sure. As it would go about just making tiny wounds on random people before putting a tiny drop of blood into them. They would only do this to one person every single day, a select few. And every time this person would have a child, it would spread down and then down. They would do this to about 1,000 kids, or 1,000 people. And then in 10 years, it had jumped to 10,000. And then in another 10 years, it would jump to another 10,000. As they had done it to around 5,000 people after the first year, doing it to a few more just so it would spread sooner. And this would continue happening up until their deaths, with around maybe 100,000 people by the time they were dying. And because of this, the Ghoul time had managed to spread. And that is where Tokyo Ghoul would end up picking up the story, as the My Hero Academia universe came before the Tokyo Ghoul universe in this What If. It came before it, and it would end up just causing it. Izuku was the first Ghoul. He was Patient Zero and had spread the entire thing. And as Bakugo would try to hunt down both Izuku and Uraraka, both of them would end up just letting him capture them. As Bakugo would look towards Uraraka, asking her why would she do this? Why would he kill so many innocent people? However, she would only look towards him. It was to survive. As Bakugo would shake his head, or they would both be placed in prison, where it would eventually break out, going into the forest and living off the land for the rest of their days. As Izuku ended up teaching her that they can live just around 2 miles north of a huge canyon or cliff, where it would basically be like how the Tokyo Ghoul on Deku Ghouls would get their human meat from just suicide and all that stuff. So Izuku and them would end up doing that, not killing any more people, having their bloodline just go on for so long. So it kind of wasn't their bloodline, and it kind of was. Still kind of a bit confusing. And that is where What If Deku Was a Ghoul comes to an end. I hope you all did enjoy this series, as it was really fun to make. And yeah, I hope you all did enjoy it. Once again, if you all did do so, please comment, like, and subscribe. It really does mean a lot. I thank you all for watching once again, and goodbye.